Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm John King. Thank you for sharing your day with us. It's off to Mar-a-Lago for Christmas. The president says big infrastructure spending is his big New Year's resolution, and he predicts, unlike 2017, there will be bipartisan dealing. Plus, friend or foe, the president's United Nations ambassador says she's making a list and checking the votes. And it's official. The president signed the big Republican tax cut plan today. It also repeals the Obamacare coverage mandate, adding this 2018 election year challenge for the president's party.
Obamacare, essentially, I think it ultimately leads to the end of Obamacare. It's essentially, I think Obamacare is over because of that, and we're going to come up with something that's really going to be very good. Many people thought it should have been overturned in the Supreme Court. Didn't quite make it, almost, but didn't quite make it. But now we're overturning the individual mandate, most unpopular thing in Obamacare.
We begin the hour with the president's big year-end achievement. Tax reform is done. The president signing into law just moments ago without the hoopla you might expect for what Republicans consider their 2017 legislative crown jewel. But the president had an explanation.
I watched the news this morning and they were all saying, will he keep his promise? Will he sign it by Christmas? You were one. But will he sign it by Christmas? And I called downstairs. I said, get it ready. We have to sign it now. We were going to wait till January 7th or 8th and do a big formal ceremony. But every one of the networks was saying, will he keep his promise? Will he sign it for Christmas, before Christmas? And so I immediately called. I said, let's get it ready.
The president happy there to paint himself as a man of action after a curiously quiet morning from the White House about how this would all play out. Just 15 minutes before he was scheduled to fly off to Mar-a-Lago for the Christmas holiday, without the normal trappings of a big historic signing ceremony, without, for example, Speaker Ryan, Leader McConnell behind him, and with the stage to himself, the president put pen to paper and saluted what he says is this bill's greatness.
This is the bill right here, and we're very proud of it. It's going to be a tremendous thing for the American people. It's going to be fantastic for the economy. And I consider this very much a bill for the middle class and a bill for jobs. And jobs are produced through companies and corporations, and you see that happening. Corporations are literally going wild over this, I think even beyond my expectation.
In the Oval Office there and a bit earlier on Twitter, the president making clear he doesn't think he's getting enough credit for what he views as a pretty big first year in office.
The country's doing very well. We've tremendously cut regulations, legislative approvals, for which I'm given no credit in the mainstream media. We have, I believe it's 88, which is number one in the history of our country. Second now is Harry Truman. Harry Truman had more legislative approvals than any other president, and a record long held. And we beat him on legislative approvals, for which I get no credit. We have more legislative victories than any other president, not including this, but this is the capper, because this is, again, the biggest tax cut, biggest reform of all time.
It's a big day. With us to share their reporting and their insights, CNN's Sarah Murray, Times' Molly Ball, CNN's Manu Raju, and Politico's Rachel Bade. Let's start with that moment and then expand out to what it means for the bigger moment, the end of the year, the president off to spend his holiday. Why did they do it this way? Why not a big signing ceremony? The president says he watched the news. He could have scheduled this differently.
He certainly could have scheduled it differently. It was actually funny, you know, normally you would be with Leader McConnell, you would be with House Speaker Ryan, and you would be signing the bill and maybe offering them pens. He actually offered the pens to members of the media who were in the room because he didn't have his partners in this legislating process with him. It was a bizarre kind of a way to do this, but I think the president clearly wanted to get this done before he left for Florida. It also seemed like an opportunity, to be honest, to dodge questions from the press. Part of sort of the hubbub of the last few days was whether he would do a press conference along with the signing of this legislation. So by doing it in a sort of a quieter way in the Oval Office, inviting just the small pool of reporters in, he avoided kind of this broader scene with the press conference, which is something the White House had been toying with doing.
Right, so from beginning of the year to the end of the year, we're not quite done yet. The president will have an active week, I'm sure, on social media, if nowhere else, while he's in Mar-a-Lago. But he's different. He's different. He could have also, you mentioned he could have had a big signing ceremony at the White House. He could have also gone out to a small business somewhere in the country and tried to make the case that this is good for America.
Well, this seems so typical of this president, right? the impulsiveness, the spontaneity, the short-term thinking, and being extremely reactive to what he just saw on TV. I mean, he is being actually extremely honest with us and with the American people, saying, I saw something on TV, it bugged me, darn it, we're going to do it now. And like, I think that was literally his thought process. Now, as you mentioned, it also meant that that he did it alone. He didn't share credit with anybody. And to the extent that Republican leaders on the Hill felt that this was their achievement too, they did all the heavy lifting, and then they don't get to stand there with the president while he signs the legislation that's the result of all their hard work. I think there may be some grumbling about that.
John, you make a key point about why do you need to go out into the country and sell this. I mean, that is going to be the challenge come 2018. They're going to have to sell this to the American public, explain why this major legislative victory actually means a lot, could help voters, because their success in the majority, in a lot of ways, this is going to be the one thing that they are campaigning on. They got this done. They have to convince a very skeptical American public that this is good for them and convince them to keep them in power right now, because as we know, things are not looking good for them come 2018. This is the one thing they have to sell. And if this one way he could have done it is going into the country and selling it that way.
And I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say the president not only needs to sell this to the country, but there's also members of his own party on the Hill who are already losing this sort of euphoria that they were feeling on Wednesday. I was speaking yesterday to Tom Rooney when they passed this short-term government funding bill for 3 weeks, just a day after, this ceremony at the White House on the tax bill. And he was fuming. He was saying, this is the epitome of a government that does not work. We are here cheering a 3-week government funding bill. How is this an achievement? They didn't pass disaster. They didn't deal with DACA. They didn't do a spending deal. So I think that the president also has to be talking to his own party and reminding them, guys, let's talk about this, instead of fuming about some other things.
And so you hear the president's frustration. And if you're a Trump supporter out there, you blame us in the media for some of this, and maybe you blame something else. If you're a Trump critic, you think he's just full of hyperbole and he really hasn't done much. I'm sorry, Mr. President, your record does not match up to Harry Truman. A lot of those were big legislative victories. You have one signature achievement, the tax cut plan, unless you consider the Russia sanctions bill. That was the other major piece of legislation, but the president doesn't like that bill.
It's not been implemented yet.
They're slow walking the implementation. That's true. But what about the moment? He thinks, and they have done a lot from a regulatory standpoint. He did get a Supreme Court justice. He did set a record at lower federal court judges being appointed. Now he has his big tax cut, and yet he goes to Mar-a-Lago as the least popular first-term president in the history of polling.
This is one of the things that's been extremely frustrating to him personally, this notion that he doesn't get credit for what he's achieved so far, but also the notion that he ran on a guy who is going to improve economic opportunity. He sort of looks at his campaign as, we talked a lot about immigration, but we talked about improving economic opportunity for Americans. And so when he looks at the jobs numbers, when he looks at GDP, when he looks at where the stock market is at, when he looks at passing tax reform and reducing regulations, he says, I have had an extremely successful year on that part of the promises I've made. Why am I not getting credit in the media? Why am I not getting credit in Washington? And why don't people love me? And the reality is that people have been unable to set aside some of their more visceral feelings about the president, about his style, about the way he behaves, about the things he has said about people, to sort of embrace those economic accomplishments, and they are good economic numbers in the way that we would expect from a traditional president. Traditionally, if a president is looking at jobs numbers like this, at economic data like this, they're sitting pretty well, and that's just not true of Trump.
And it's a great point, because it's almost the flip side of what we went through early in the Obama administration, in the sense that a lot of the policy proposals were not popular with the public, but the president was personally popular. People liked him, so his numbers stayed up. With President Trump, they don't like him, and so anything with his name on it polls poorly. This Democratic pollster, Peter Hart, one of the smartest people in the business, wrote this in a year-end memo. He's the Democratic and the Democrat-Republican partnership on the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, did a ton of focus groups across the country this year with voters. He writes this: Donald Trump lost the support and respect of a majority of Americans in his first year as president. In 2017, Americans hoped the Trump era would be about changing Washington and the old established order, but they did not sign on to the division and discord. Instead, 2017 has found Americans feeling that they are living constantly on edge. Instead of being a unifying force or a stable leader, he has been an unnerving presence. That's a harsh verdict. Now, Peter's a Democrat, but when he writes these things, he's looking at the data, and he's giving a pretty straightforward assessment there. Ouch.
Well, and I think that is what you see. I mean, that's what I hear talking to people around the country, and that's what you see in a lot of these polls, that despite the economic stability, people really feel the sense of uncertainty. There's a huge number of Americans who feel that the country is on the wrong track. That number has increased since the election. It hasn't gone down. A huge majority of Americans feel that the president is dividing the country rather than bringing the country together. And we see Trump's support softening even as the opposition to him hardens. That strong disapproval number in some polls over 50%. That's really remarkable. And so, you know, people are not able to ignore the ways that the president behaves. And you know, given that the president is the one in charge of his behavior, I'm not sure why he would expect them to.
And he hasn't really done much to try to bring the country together. In fact, he's gone after his opponents when they've come after him in rather stark terms. In the legislative achievements that have occurred are ones that his base loves. And one reason why they've been very happy with him, he's still 30 to 35, 36% of hardcore supporters. Judicial nominees, that's loved by the conservative base. Getting Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, loved by the conservative base. This tax reform bill is something that their core constituency appreciates as well. So what he has accomplished has done well for his core supporters, but to the middle of the country, the folks who are in the middle who are not Democrats, not liberals, those independent voters, they're not sold yet.
But do we know, as he goes off for Christmas, reflecting, he's got another month in his first year, but he goes off the holidays to reflect, assuming he does reflect, are there lessons learned? You see, Speaker Ryan says he thought he learned a lesson in the tax cut debate, that he stayed out of the minutia. During the Obamacare debate, the president at several occasions sent things off the rails a little bit by getting involved when the leaders didn't want him to get involved, or getting involved in a way the leaders didn't want him to get involved. Did he learn that lesson, how to be a better deal maker, a better legislator? And more importantly, you see all these recounts today in Politico, the New York Times, and elsewhere about this contentious meeting with the White House political team about how to handle this going into 2018. What should the strategy be? How much should the president travel? They're still having a lot of backstabbing and infighting.
I would say from the Hill standpoint, I've heard Republicans give him compliments in terms of how lessons learned on legislation on the tax bill in particular. He tried to take a more aggressive approach in terms of campaigning and talking about the tax bill around the country. And he didn't do a lot of attacking when he heard people were not going to vote for this bill. Instead, he tried to get them to come around. Senator Corker eventually came around. The way he worked with Susan Collins was particularly interesting, a moderate who obviously had problems with the Obamacare repeal bill. He wasn't attacking her. Instead, the White House worked with her and said, listen, if you vote for this tax bill, we're going to back the idea of propping up the Obamacare subsidies next year. So that was more of a cooperation approach, it seemed like, with the tax bill.
It's going to be fascinating to see how Trump goes on the campaign trail, decides which races, particularly on the Senate side, he thinks he'll be valuable. The candidates will think he's valuable. People like Dean Heller in Nevada, who needs Trump presumably to get out of the primary, but Trump could be a significant liability in a general election. How do you balance that? That's going to be a remarkable thing for the White House to decide on how to deploy Trump.
Right, and that's the perfect segue. Up next, the president touts what he's got done in 2017, but Congress has a lot on its plate early next year. The Republicans want to get an early start, maybe meet with the president over the holidays.
Do you have any plans to visit Mar-a-Lago over the holidays?
No. The closest I'm going to a bowl game in Jacksonville.
For millions of baby boomers.
And they were ignored by the president. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So during the final days of the Alabama Senate race, this is back when Donald Trump was still considering whether to go all in on Roy Moore. He was sort of going back and forth on it. And you had the Republican National Committee chairwoman, Ronna Romney McDaniel, basically go to White House Chief of Staff John Kelly and produced for him a 2-page memo which showed how under Trump the GOP was support among women voters was plummeting. They're basically showing how fast the Republican Party was falling and essentially warning him that a full-fledged Trump endorsement of Roy Moore would further damage the party's standing with women. And it was a warning that, as you said, went unheeded. Trump went all in for Roy Moore, and we all know what happened next. Moore lost, and there's a lot of concern right now heading into 2018. The Republicans are really struggling with women voters, and that could turn against them next year at the ballot box.
As everybody's trying to figure out what that strategy is for 2018, Amy, you also have some reporting on Hillary Clinton and how she may or may not be used, sort of the cost-benefit analysis that's being done. Is there also a conversation that needs to be had with Hillary Clinton? And are there people perhaps among establishment Democrats who are not getting the message in the same way that maybe it is time for Hillary Clinton to step aside?
Yeah, so there's kind of this push-pull happening. A lot of people want her in. They think that she could be beneficial and helpful in their districts, particularly if she won those in 16. And so they're kind of encouraging her to come in and help out. But there are a lot of people that I talked to, a lot of Democrats, even Democrats that supported her, that are saying, please don't. This is a time to kind of clear the decks, bring in new, fresh blood. This is what we need as a party. We don't need Barack Obama. We don't need Hillary Clinton. And I think you're hearing a lot of that coming from both sides. So there's, and there's no leader of the Democratic Party right now. So they're looking for someone to kind of fill that void, and that's really hard for them.
And that's the search that we've been talking about for some time, actually, in terms of filling that void. Also in terms of whether or not the people at the top of the party, if there is one, and of course in this case it's the president, are helpful. David, also in Alex's piece, Charlie Dent noting that the president should be, in his words, very discreet and selective about where he campaigns. Is that message, David, getting through at the White House?
Well, we'll see when we see the president's travel schedule next year. What's going to be really interesting, and this is obviously not the first time, we saw Barack Obama deal with this in 2010. His numbers weren't great, and how Democrats navigated using him or not in advance of the sort of bloodbath they had there. The same thing with George W. Bush in 2006. But Donald Trump is even lower right now, and so how Donald Trump reacts to Republicans who say thanks but no thanks, Mr. President, is going to be a fascinating storyline to watch in 2018. This is not a president who likes to be rebuffed. He's got a pretty sensitive ego about these things. And so how watching him deal with how his party navigates his low numbers if they don't improve will be critical to how the Trump political operation deals with 2018.
It will be also fascinating to see how much of that is actually made public and how much we learn about that. Rebecca, the president also tweeting this morning about that he envisions some bipartisan work ahead in 2018, and it could begin with infrastructure. Are you hearing about an appetite for that?
Well, that's a rosy view of things, I would say, Erica. There might be an appetite on behalf of the president. Mitch McConnell has also said he wants to see things get done on a bipartisan basis in 2018 if they're going to get anything done at all. But there are a few things working against the president in this respect. First of all, it's an election year, and lawmakers don't tend to like to do tough things in an election year. And so even in something like infrastructure, you're talking about government spending that might be running up the deficit potentially. And so that could be a tough sell for many Republicans in a tough election year for them. But also, I think what we saw with tax reform, for example, is even some of these vulnerable Democrats in red states, running in states where Trump won in 2016, they didn't have an appetite to work with Republicans. They feel like they're in a very strong position politically. The president is unpopular. Republicans are unpopular. Their policies are unpopular. So politically, there isn't this great incentive for Democrats to work with Republicans. In fact, the incentive might be for them to work against Republicans next year.
Which will be fascinating to see. We are still waiting. We should be hearing from the president shortly. But real quickly, Alex, back to your piece. One of the other things you touched on is the concern, not just about women, but also the concern about the suburbs. That's a major concern for both parties at this point. But to hear Republicans talk about it, especially after 2016, there's a light bulb there.
Absolutely. This is a major reason why Democrats won in Alabama, and it was a really big reason why Democrats won in Virginia last month, and it became such a big point of concern for the White House after the Virginia gubernatorial election that basically the White House put together an after-action report looking at...
Alex, I'm going to have to stop you there for a second. Let's listen in. Here's the president from the Oval Office.
You're on.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here, and Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, have great holidays. We are going to sign some very important things today. One is a continuing resolution that very importantly gives us the right, and we are ordering $4 billion worth of missile defense equipment and missiles themselves. Very important, top of the line, best in the world. We make the best military product in the world. Nobody is even close. So we're ordering $4 billion worth of missile defense, and that will be done by signing right here, and also by notifying the Speaker of the House and President of the Senate, designating the missile defense as emergency defense fund. So it's $4 billion for that, and $700 million for various other military forms of equipment. And I'm very honored to be doing that. Our military has been doing a fantastic job in so many ways with ISIS, and everything they're touching lately has been working out. So we're signing that. This is the letter to Mitch McConnell and separately to Paul Ryan, authorizing that having to do with missile defense. Okay. Very important. So that's being done today, and that's going to be sent out. And then when I watched the news, as you know, we had the largest tax cuts in our history just approved. And I was going to wait for a formal signing sometime in early January, but then I watched the news this morning, and they were all saying, will he keep his promise? Will he sign it by Christmas? You were one. But will he sign it by Christmas? And I called downstairs. I said, get it ready. We have to sign it now. We were going to wait till January 7th or 8th and do a big formal ceremony. But every one of the networks was saying, will he keep his promise? Will he sign it for Christmas, before Christmas? And so I immediately called. I said, let's get it ready. As you know, $3.2 trillion in tax cuts for American families, including the doubling of the standard deduction and the doubling of the child tax credit. The typical family of four earning $75,000, we see an income tax cut of more than $2,000. Many much higher than that, slashing their tax bill in half. And they're going to start to see that because we're signing today. They're going to start to see that in February. The numbers will speak. One of the big things that happened, you have some great companies. I want to thank AT&T, who actually was the first out of the box, and Boeing and Sinclair and Wells Fargo and Comcast, even though they own NBC, which is not so nice to the presidency or the president. But Comcast also, they all have made tremendous contributions to their employees and tremendous contributions to spending money in this country because of the tax bill. And they all said that it's because of the tax bill. So they're making tremendous investments. That means jobs. It means a lot of things. And we're very happy. So that's AT&T, Boeing, Sinclair, Wells Fargo, Comcast, and now many other companies, as you see. In fact, just this morning, I see 3 more companies came on. A friend of mine, Bob Kraft, called me last night. He said, this tax bill is incredible. He owns the New England Patriots, but he's in the paper business, too. And he said, based on this tax bill, he just wanted to let me know that he's going to buy a big plant in the great state of North Carolina, and he's going to build a tremendous paper mill there, or paper products plant. And I've had many calls such as that, where people that are entrepreneurs, people in business, they're going out and they're going to buy, frankly, factories that are closed, abandoned, and now they're not going to be abandoned any longer. This is having an even bigger impact, faster than I thought. The corporate tax rate, as you know, will be lowered from 35% to 21%. That means that more products will be made in the USA. A lot of things are going to be happening in the USA. We're going to bring back our companies that they've already started coming back. I think they had certain confidence in me. They figured we were going to get this done, but they have already started. Something very important to me, the family farmers and small business owners who lost their business because of the estate tax. Most of them won't have any estate tax to pay. It will be a great thing for their families. You can leave your farm to your family. You can leave your business, your small business, to your family, not even so small. because the numbers are pretty big here. So they'll be exempt from having to pay estate tax, which will be tremendous. They'll keep their farms and their businesses and the family. Businesses will be able to deduct 100% of the cost of their capital investments in the year the investment is made. That's called expensing. And to do one-year expensing, I think, is going to be one of the biggest things in the bill, frankly. I think people are going to go out and absolutely go wild over expensing. Bob Kraft mentioned that last night in his telephone call. The fact that they can expense, do one-year expensing is a fantastic asset. Historic small business tax cuts and pass-throughs now are made really, really good for the business owner. They're hiring people. I see it on television. I'm reading about it all over, where people are hiring a lot of people right now to go to work. The small business tax cut and the pass-throughs are now really incentivizing people. We're going to bring back probably $4 trillion from overseas. Nobody knows the exact number, but it's massive. It'll be over $3 trillion. It could be $5 trillion, but it's a tremendous amount of money that was caught overseas that the bureaucracy plus the tax laws didn't allow it to reasonably be brought back into our country. So we think at least $4 trillion is going to be brought back. And if you look at that, it's going to be brought back right under the code. This is something that Republicans wanted for years and Democrats wanted for years, and yet it never got done. Who would object to trillions of dollars being brought back into our country? Nobody. But it never got done. Now it's being done. And the bottom line is, this is the biggest tax cuts and reform in the history of our country. This is bigger than actually President Reagan's many years ago. I'm very honored by it. In addition, we have ANWR. We're opening up ANWR for drilling. They've tried to get that for 40 years. They've tried to get that even during the Reagan administration. They could never get it. That alone would be a big bill if that ever happened, but that's even part of this. And we have, of course, the individual mandate, which is a very unfair and very unpopular provision, as you know, in Obamacare. Essentially, I think it ultimately leads to the end of Obamacare. It's essentially, I think Obamacare is over because of that, and we're going to come up with something that's really going to be very good. But the individual mandate was very unfair because you're basically saying pay for something in order not to have to get health care. So you're paying not to have health care. It was very unfair. Many people thought it should have been overturned in the Supreme Court. Didn't quite make it, almost, but didn't quite make it. But now we're overturning the individual mandate, most unpopular thing in Obamacare. Very, very unfair. So this is the bill right here, and we're very proud of it. It's going to be a tremendous thing for the American people. It's going to be fantastic for the economy. It's going to keep companies from leaving our shores and opening up in other countries. They are very disincentivized to do that. There's not a lot of sense to do that. You do that, and I don't think you're going to be running your company very well. So what's happening is we're going to sign this. This is a little picture of it. It fits nicely in the box. I said take it out of the box because people have to see. And all of this, everything in here, is really tremendous things for businesses, for people, for the middle class, for workers. And I consider this very much a bill for the middle class and a bill for jobs. And jobs are produced through companies and corporations, and you see that happening. Corporations are literally going wild over this. I think even beyond my expectations, so far beyond my expectations. So I'll sign this today rather than having a very big formal ceremony in 2 weeks when we were going to do it, because I didn't want you folks to say that I wasn't keeping my promise. I am keeping my promise. I'm signing it before Christmas. I said that the bill would be on my desk before Christmas, and you are holding me literally to that. So we did a rush job today. It's not fancy, but it's the Oval Office. It's the great Oval Office. And just to conclude, our country's doing very well. We've tremendously cut regulations, legislative approvals, for which I'm given no credit in the mainstream media. We have, I believe it's 88, which is #1 in the history of our country. Second now is Harry Truman. Harry Truman had more legislative approvals than any other president. and a record long held. And we beat him on legislative approvals, for which I get no credit. A lot of people say he needed this because he has had no legislative approvals. Well, if you look at VA Accountability Act and so many other bills having to do with the VA, having to do with the military, having to do with many things, we have more legislative victories than any other president, not including this, but this is the capper because this is, again, the biggest tax cut, biggest reform of all time. So it's an honor to have you with us, and we will sign this right now. This is something I'm very proud of. Great for our country, great for the American people. Thank you all. So we won't do the whole thing, but this is basically what it is. That's your bill. And I want to thank some people in particular that aren't here because, again, we expected a formal ceremony in 2 weeks. But Mitch McConnell has been fantastic. Worked so hard. We would speak at 3 in the morning and 2 in the morning, and we would speak whenever we had to speak, but he worked so hard. And the exact same thing can be said for Paul Ryan. They are very proud of this, and we're already seeing the results. And as I said, long ahead of schedule. Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, thank you very much. Orrin Hatch, the chairman, made a beautiful speech the other day in front of the White House. An absolutely brilliant, beautiful speech, and we appreciated it, and I appreciated it. Hardworking. Kevin Brady, I don't think he slept for months. It's almost like that's all he did was this. Mike Enzi, Senator Enzi. Diane Black. Rob Portman, the group of Rob Portman. Rob worked so hard, so knowledgeable on the subject. Pat Toomey, likewise. Tim Scott, likewise. John Thune, likewise. These people work so hard, and I don't know if they're given the proper credit. And the whole Senate, when I say the Senate, unfortunately, the Republicans in the Senate. Democrats don't like tax cuts. They want to raise your taxes. They don't want to lower your taxes. They want to raise your taxes, and they want to spend money foolishly on things that we don't need in many cases. So we're cutting taxes, we're taking care of our military, and we're taking care of people. And we're really doing a job on jobs. So these folks have been so fantastic that I had to call them out. And plenty of others, believe me, Republicans in the House and Republicans in the Senate have been incredible. So this is what we got. We had it. It was all set to go. As soon as I got back from Christmas, where we'll be working in Florida, I'll be working very hard during that Christmas because we have many things we're talking about, including North Korea, including a lot of things happening in the Middle East, as you know. We've made tremendous strides, obviously, in Syria with ISIS. We've taken back virtually all of the caliphate, all of the land. Same thing in Iraq, and we're making tremendous strides. It's sort of the unwritten story right now, but since my speech on Afghanistan, we're making tremendous progress, tremendous strides. We've opened it up, and it's a whole different world in Afghanistan, I can tell you that. So I'll be working very hard over the holidays. Again, I want to wish you a very Merry Christmas. I have some beautiful pens over here, and because all of these folks are either continuing to work down the road or getting ready to leave, and I'm sure they'll be working very hard also, I think I'm probably going to hand some of them to the press. Does the media, would any of the media like any of, oh, look at these camera guys. But I think we'll do that. So we have them. Many of you have worked very hard. Many of you have worked very, very fairly, and we really appreciate that. So here you go, folks. You want the box with it or not, huh?
Mr. President, can you talk a little bit about how much you'll travel to sell this tax
I don't think I'm going to have to travel too much to sell it. I think it's selling itself. It's becoming very popular. But I think you'll see something on February 1st when they open up the paycheck. That's when you're going to start to see it, because by signing it now, it kicks in for this year. Remember, if we didn't make a certain date, it wouldn't kick in until next year, meaning the following year, 19, and I wasn't happy with that. So we worked very, very hard to make sure it was this year. Even language originally said the corporate would kick in 19, but we didn't do that. We have it kicking in now, but we had a sign. So I don't think we're going to have to do much selling. I think the corporations that are giving billions and billions of dollars away to their workers, and many more are coming, I think that's really what's selling this, maybe better than anybody could, including myself. But I think come February, when they open their checks and they see, wow, what happened? I have a lot more money in here. I think that's really going to be something very special. So have a great holiday, folks. Some of you folks take, I in particular like the boom holders. They were so nice to me the other day, right? And the cameramen. And the cameramen.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Will they regret it? I think the Democrats will really regret. The Democrats already regret it. You know, they have their typical thing, it's for the rich. They know that's not true. And they've been called out on it by the media, actually. But the Democrats very much regret it. They wanted to be a part of it, just doesn't work out. But I really do believe, and I said on social media today, I really do believe we're going to have a lot of bipartisan work done. And maybe we start with infrastructure, because I really believe infrastructure can be bipartisan. We've spent $7 trillion in the Middle East, not to mention all of the lives and all of the heartache, and it's so sad. $7 trillion. It's time for us to rebuild our country. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
You should have started with infrastructure at the beginning of this year.
Well, we're going to get infrastructure. Infrastructure is the easiest of all. We're very well on our way. We've essentially repealed Obamacare. You know, the individual mandate is a very big factor in this bill, frankly. A lot of people don't talk about it because the tax cut is so important. But infrastructure is by far the easiest. People want it, Republicans and Democrats. We're going to have tremendous Democrat support on infrastructure, as you know. I could have started with infrastructure. I actually wanted to save the easy one for the one down the road. So we'll be having that done pretty quickly. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you learn anything in this process that you think will help you?
Yeah, I think I have. You know, one thing I really learned is I learned and got to know and became very friendly with the people in the House, the people in the Senate, both Republicans and Democrats. When I came, you know, I didn't know too many. I was very politically active, but I didn't know too many. I think the fact that I've become friends with so many of the names that I just read off and so many of the senators, so many of the congressmen and women, I think that's a huge factor. I can call anybody now. I know every one of them very well. And I understand the legislation very well. So, you know, it's been a process. It's been a great process, really beautiful. But I do believe that the fact that I have gotten to know so many of these people, and many of these people, I have to say, I'm not saying all, but I'm saying many of these people are great people that truly love this country. So I think that helps. And I think you'll see that in this legislation. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all.
And again, President Trump there moments ago in the Oval Office signing that tax reform bill. I want to go straight now to Jeff Zeleny at the White House, who was in the room. Jeff, about 20 minutes there. We heard a fair amount from the president. Walk us through a little bit more of that.
Eric, it was certainly interesting. The president was perhaps giving a bit of a, reality show view of signing this bill, saying he wasn't going to sign it, but then he decided to sign it to keep his promise. Perhaps injecting a bit of drama into the news programs. He acknowledged that he was indeed watching this morning on television. But just the top lines here, he did sign that emergency spending bill to keep the government open for a few more weeks. He noted the defense spending in there as well. And of course, he signed the signature tax plan, and he thumped it on his desk a little bit. It's pretty tall. It's about, 3 inches tall or so. He thumped it as he signed it, of course, touting this as his biggest accomplishment. But then after that was over, he was asked if he plans to travel around the country a lot and selling this bill. He knows polling is clear. It's not popular. A majority of Americans believe that it will not benefit them. The president was more optimistic. He said, look, I don't think we have to do much to sell this bill. People will see it in their paychecks. He called out companies individually for giving some bonuses to workers, for committing to invest some more money in building and things. And then at the end, of course, he said he wanted to work with Democrats. And he tweeted that this morning, saying that he hoped that Democrats would work with him on infrastructure. So I actually asked him there at the end if he wishes he would have started his first year with infrastructure, if he wishes he would have started something with a bipartisan support on this. And he said he wanted to save infrastructure because it's easier. So he believes he will try and do that in 2018. Erica, that is a tall order. Republicans do not agree on the funding for this. Some Democrats now are likely reluctant to work with this president, but we will see how that plays out in 2018. And as we kept asking questions, the president, to me, seemed eager to answer them. And that is something that's been going on behind the scenes here, Erica, that the president, in fact, wanted to hold a news conference. His aides advised him against it, thinking that all types of questions would come up. But at the very end there, you couldn't quite hear him on camera. I asked him if he had any regrets from this year, if he had any regrets from 2017. He looked us square in the eye and says, no. Erica?
And there we have it. And it is interesting, as you point out, that he was more open to questions today and did want to speak more with reporters. Jeff, thank you. Our panel is also back with us. David, I want to touch on a couple of things that Jeff just brought up, which also stood out to me as well. And let's pick up on infrastructure first, because we did end on that. The president saying he wanted to save what was easier for down the road. And yet, not only is this difficult because Republicans and Democrats clearly don't see eye to eye here, it's also, as you pointed out, we're moving into an election year. How easy is infrastructure?
Yeah, well, and it just got a little more complicated by the price tag associated with the tax plan. I mean, this is, there is going to be an added deficit issue to deal with as if the president's going to push infrastructure as they try to deal with the funding around it. That being said, it is the kind of issue that both Republicans and Democrats, and I see now we see the president at Joint Base Andrews crossing from the helicopter to the plane to actually begin his vacation. It is, Erica, I think, an issue that we have seen Democrats and Republicans join forces on in the past. Lots of bipartisan plans have been put forth about how to deal with infrastructure, but I do think the price tag associated with it is going to be a huge problem, and how it gets paid for. And he may be right that he can pick off maybe some deep red state Democrats that are up for re-election. But right now, as you noted, it is an election year we're coming into, and the Democratic base is so fired up by an anti-Trump energy that I think that Democrats are going to think 2 or 3 times before they start working with this president.
A couple of other things that stood out. I was specifically picking up on the president saying this bill is going to sell itself. I mean, we heard from Mitch McConnell, they can't sell this, that they're in the wrong line of work. And he believes, Amy, that it is a lot of these corporate bonuses which are being announced, which are doing the sales job for him.
Right. And yeah, you heard him kind of tout these companies by name. And I think that was a really big thing for him. He tweeted about it this morning. This is a big focus. This was his news conference, if you want to call it that, his end of the year news conference, where he kind of talked about all the things that he's done, the things that he's most proud of. And I think this was something that he really wanted to highlight today, that corporations are kind of rallying behind this, that it's good for the economy, and that people, the middle class, will see this in their paychecks. And he repeated that a few times.
We'll have to see if that bears fruit and how that bears out as we move into 2018 and specifically into February, as we heard. Alex, another thing at the end that was interesting, he talked about the relationships that he has formed with members of both the House and the Senate, that he didn't know a lot of people when he got there. He now considers a lot of these people, he even said some Republicans and Democrats, friends. And it just brings to mind when Barack Obama first came into office and tried to do things a different way. And there was a lot of criticism that he was not reaching out enough to lawmakers and was not trying to work with them enough. Has President Trump reached out enough in that respect? Has he really established these friendships that he talked about?
Well, it's interesting. He has been reaching out to a lot of senators, particularly on the R side, to talk about to talk about legislation, to talk about how things are going to go next year. And, in addition to talking with Republican senators about perhaps bringing up some kind of infrastructure bill in hopes of gathering Democratic support, he's also talked about things like doing a prescription drug benefit bill. And so all these things are going to be geared towards winning over crossover Democratic support. But look, as some of your other guests have noted, it's going to be very hard to get that done, in part because a lot of these Democrats are going to be under extraordinary pressure from their own base not to play ball with him, not to cooperate with him, because they have to worry about primaries from their own side in 2018. And so it's going to be very hard to see this president reach out across the aisle, particularly with his approval rating at around 35%, and really get something done.
Rebecca, we heard a short time ago from Mitch McConnell, who the president called fantastic.
The 13 pounds and 7 inches overall in your first month. Lose weight fast. Money back guaranteed.
An end-of-the-year plea from the leading Democrat in the House of Representatives asking the Speaker to preserve the ongoing Russia investigation. In a letter to the Speaker, Paul Ryan, Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi says Democrats are, quote, deeply concerned by the majority's efforts to curtail the House Intelligence Committee investigation and its overall failure to address Russia's meddling in the 2016 election. Now, she also says, quote, we expect that you will take urgent action to ensure this investigation can continue and justice can be pursued unhindered. Joining us now, the Illinois Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Happy holidays to all.
Thank you to you as well. What evidence are you seeing, Congressman, of Republican pushback or interference with your investigation?
Yeah, where to begin? I think first it's the rogue partisan investigations that they have launched and undertaken without even talking to us about it. Second, they have
What do you mean by the rogue partisan investigations? Explain what you mean by that, Congressman.
Look, the Republicans are undergoing investigations of activities that took place a long time ago, and when in doubt, they attack Hillary Clinton. They never spoke to us about going after the Canadian uranium investigation and others. So it's clear that their legal strategy is, oh yeah, what about you? What about Hillary Clinton? So that makes it difficult to go forward just on the Russian investigation. And on the Russian investigation, they have refused subpoenas on key areas. We are dozens of witnesses that still need to come forward. In the meantime, we probably need some of our key witnesses back under subpoena so that they'd actually answer key questions. So there are rushing interviews without documentations. As of the time I left yesterday, there were no interviews scheduled for January, and there were interviews scheduled while we were undertaking votes out of the Washington, D.C. area.
As you know, Congressman, the FBI Deputy Director, Andrew McCabe, he testified in front of your committee behind closed doors this week. What can you tell us about the focus of the questioning and his response?
Yeah, it's really the third prong of why I believe the Republicans are trying to create a shiny object, a distraction, or an obstruction to the Russian investigation. They absolutely have no shame. I think what they're doing is attacking a war hero, a person with impeccable credentials, bipartisan support before Mr. Mueller. They're going after the FBI. They're going after the Justice Department because, frankly, the investigation is getting scary. It's reached the White House. The indictments that have taken place, the plea deal that has taken place, I think, frankly, scares them. And they're taking extreme measures going after those undertaking the investigation.
What can you tell us, if you can tell us, whether the Deputy FBI Director McCabe actually corroborated former FBI Director James Comey's testimony about conversations Comey had with President Trump?
Yeah, I honestly can't talk about what the testimony was. I'll corroborate it was the discussions have been tense, and I believe when you take all this into totality, it proves the point I made before. They're going after those who are accusing them, trying to undermine the investigation. They literally have no shame.
Bloomberg is reporting that Steve Bannon, the former chief White House strategist, and Corey Lewandowski, who was the former Trump campaign manager, will be called to testify before your committee. Talk about that. Have you been informed that the two of them will be coming before the House Intelligence Committee?
it's interesting. I'm on the Intel committee.
Fast, money back guaranteed.